And welcome to the Take a Breather podcast with Stacey Every and Eric Almeida. We are certified emotional freedom technique practitioners, and on this podcast, we discuss how EFT can improve your mental and physical health by bringing real healing to the body and to the mind. We also have different types of practitioners visit us on the show to tell us about their healing methods and how they facilitate deep healing. As always, give us a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts, like and subscribe to us on YouTube. That helps the podcast out a ton. And today, our special guest is Rachel Kuhn. She is a licensed mental health counselor with a specialization in trauma. We're so happy to have you, Rachel. And Stacey, take it away with the first question.
Yeah, Rachel, thank you so much for being here with us today. I really appreciate you being on our podcast.
Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. So, how about we just start off with the basics? Can you tell us more about who you are and what it is you do?
So I am a licensed mental health counselor based in Longmeadow, Massachusetts. I am trained in EMDR, I'm trained in DBT, I'm certified in EFT. I have background in both Reiki and some shamanic work. So my practice is largely with women. That's just sort of how it's evolved.
Nice. So I've heard of CBT, cognitive behavioral therapy, and I know I've heard of DBT, but I really know nothing about it. Could you do like a little overview on both CBT as well as DBT?
CBT is sort of like the gold standard of counseling, right? So it's cognitive behavioral therapy, and it's sort of linking your thoughts, your actions, and your feelings, right? So it's sort of how to change those things and how to work with that kind of triangle together. DBT is completely different. So DBT was developed by a woman named Marsha Linehan, who herself was diagnosed with borderline personality disorder years and years and years ago. She's now got her doctorate. She's probably, I'm going to guess, she's over later years. She was diagnosed, and the way they treated her was they basically like locked her up and put her in a padded cell. So she was suicidal. There were really no treatments at the time for how to deal with people with borderline personality disorder. So she basically went to school, taught herself, and developed DBT. And DBT is a program that's based on working with folks with borderline personality disorder, but can also, the skills that she developed can be used with anybody. So there's a DBT program. DBT programs tend to last about 6 months. Often you do the program twice. You do it like in clinics. A lot of clinics do it where you have a DBT counselor, trained counselor, and then there's a DBT group that you're part of. And so you work very closely between the counselor and the group, and you do skills training. And the skills are in mindfulness, interpersonal effectiveness, distress tolerance, and emotion regulation. And they're very specific skill sets. And so they help people kind of manage their emotions and sort of stay safe.
Okay.
Mindfulness, distress tolerance, emotional regulation. What was the fourth one?
Interpersonal effectiveness. And so when I did clinic work, I ran a DBT group for a couple of years for people with a variety of diagnoses, because all of these skills are useful for anybody. I mean, anybody can benefit. And so I use those skills in my practice all the time.
Yeah. So, go ahead, Eric.
I was just going to say, so for our listeners, DBT is a dialectical behavioral therapy.
Yes.
And so, but Stacey, go ahead.
So what does that look like practically speaking when it comes to like, I guess that's a big question, but so when it comes to those four areas, what happens, in a group, what happens to, like, what's the actual way of, how does one become more emotionally taught? Like, what does that actually mean? I guess what I'm trying to say.
Yeah. So Marsha Linehan basically created this workbook of what she has, like each of those categories has this very specific set of skills that you teach to a client. So for example, in mindfulness, one of the exercises is called mindfulness of current thoughts. And it's a way of starting to notice your thoughts and let them go. So for example, we would teach clients, you can use any number of visual tools. The one people tend to like the best is you imagine yourself sitting by a stream and you see your thought come, and you imagine your thought like a leaf. And you allow that thought to drop on the stream and go down the stream. It's a way of starting to just pay attention to your thoughts and allow your thoughts not to trigger you into an emotional response, because you're noticing, here's your thinking mind just having thoughts. So you notice the thought, you put it on a leaf, you drop it on the stream, and you wait for the next one. You notice, I'm having that thought, you put it on a leaf, you let it go. Sooner or later, you're going to wind up down the stream, right? And then you take a breath and you bring yourself back. But it's a way of just being mindful and present in your thoughts and noticing you can have a thought and let it go, and you don't have to believe it, and you don't have to have an emotional response to it, right? So for example, when you're doing a group, one day might be spent in part teaching mindfulness of current thoughts, right? And so she sort of breaks each area down into like an interpersonal effectiveness section. There's a skill called Dear Man, and the DEARMAN is, each letter stands for something. And it's a communication approach to how to ask for something that you want from your partner and how to negotiate what you want. So you teach those skills, and then you practice it. So the skills are like super specific, you know, like in distress tolerance, it's like, I'm really, really upset. I don't know what to do. I'm gonna go dunk my head in a bowl of really, really cold water, because that induces this diver's response and will allow me to slow down and have a different emotional response, right? Or she teaches the stop skill, which is about when things are really crazy, how to stop, look around, observe what's going on, and decide mindfully how you want to proceed. So it's very granular, you know, it's like use this skill, use that skill, use this skill, then use that skill. And so it starts to change people's behaviors.
Right. I can see what, so the groups are as much about practicing the skills, I assume, as it is about learning the skills.
The group is sort of like, you teach the skills, you might practice the skills, then you ask people, you know, you might give homework over the week. And in individual sessions, you know, you're sort of trying to work closely with what's happening in the group, and helping the clients stay on track each week with certain behaviors. They're often trying to reduce harmful behaviors. A lot of folks in DBT programs have self-harming behaviors, have certain behaviors they're trying to change. And so you're literally tracking that on a chart and looking at what happened that led you to that behavior, trying to notice those thoughts, notice the vulnerabilities that led to it, and make changes so that next time you choose a different set of circumstances. Maybe you're not hungry. Maybe you make sure you're not so tired. Maybe you make sure, you know, you did things you needed so you didn't get so vulnerable to your emotion mind.
The mindfulness piece I see being sort of a part of the other three pieces, right? That you need mindfulness in order to be able to have the distress tolerance. You need the mindfulness to notice you're having a distressful moment that you can do something about, to go dunk your head in the cold water, right?
For sure. And so when I taught it, I just did each section in order. Some folks do, like, you teach a section and then you do like 2 weeks of mindfulness. Then you teach the next session and you do 2 weeks of it. Like, you keep coming back to the mindfulness. And one of the very basic tenets that I use all the time with my clients is this idea that we all have our own wise mind. And sometimes we get stuck in emotion mind, where we're sort of hot and reactive and just sort of emotion driven. And then some folks get stuck in this kind of rational mind, logical thinking, kind of more cold and judgmental, and that both are important. And so the Venn diagram I'm drawing with my hands is that where those two things overlap is wise mind. And wise mind is that place of knowing where you balance the emotion and the logical, and you come from this place of mindfulness. So she spends a lot of time talking about, like, how do you access your wise mind that all of us have inside us, that wisdom that knows what's the right thing to do. In internal family systems theory, it's the core self. Like, it's all the same thing, you know, that they don't, you know.
And it is the wise mind that is able to, in fact, and they call it unblending in internal family systems, where you unblend from the emotion.
When you unblend back from all the parts, you get to your core self, who's kind of the leader,
who then can see that you're triggered. They can can say, hey, you're being triggered right now. What do you want to, let's do something else, rather than react, rather than being, it's that self that gets to make that decision.
Yeah.
Interesting. So, I mean, that's really the key, right? Like, that's the fundamental piece, is having the detachment to be able to see what you're feeling or what you're saying or doing in a way that you can make a choice rather than being lost in the moments.
Yeah, I mean, I think the mindfulness allows you to diagnose what's going on in the moment, right? But sometimes you can't get to that. You can't, you know, so often it's like, later I could say, yeah, I know I needed to stop then and do something different. But in the moment, I can't be mindful because I'm filled with an emotion, which is why the distress tolerance skills are really helpful, right? So I see myself go from green to yellow to red, and suddenly I'm in a rage. What are the cues that let me know I'm in a rage? Are my fists clenched? Am I, is my heart racing? What am I doing? Okay, I'm in a rage. I can't see straight, but I know I need to do something. I'm going to dunk my head in cold water. I'm going to go for a run. I'm going to do some jumping jacks. I'm going to put cold water on my wrists and my forehead, something to help me calm down. And then I can even be mindful. It's hard to be mindful when you're flooded with emotion, right? It's hard to, and then I can think, okay, now how do I want to act next? Right.
And I'm seeing how the little I know about EMDR and then certainly EFT works so beautifully to helping people get to a state of mindfulness.
Yeah, it's really interesting. So my most favorite book that I've read recently is called Burnout, How to Unlock the Stress Cycle. And it's by these two women who actually live up here in Western Massachusetts, Emily and Amelia, I think Nagoski is their name. And it's about how when something is going wrong, you have a stressor in your life and you get stressed, you can't always solve the stressor, but you can work out your own stress cycle, right? Which is sort of what we were just talking about, right? Like you need to, if you that people get upset, it's like they talk about like going through a tunnel. And so something happens, you get upset, you start feeling an emotion, and then you get stuck in the middle of the tunnel. You don't complete the stress cycle because usually people get afraid to experience a really intense emotion. So they back away from it, they distract, they numb out, they eat, they drink, they do whatever they do. And they don't allow their bodies to get to the end of the stress cycle, or they just let stress accumulate and never process it. So they say there are a variety of ways you can complete the stress cycle. You can exercise, you can meditate, you can hug someone, and they give the prescribed number of seconds to hug someone to get that chemical response.
I read that study, 20 seconds.
It's amazing, right? You can kiss someone, even better with tongue, and it can do that too, right? Like someone you love. And they're actually very particular about the kind of hug that you do, the type of hug it has to be. So the different kinds of things to complete the stress cycle, and tapping is the same thing, right? So if you're feeling emotionally dysregulated and you tap and it's another way of releasing, just like exercise would be, and it allows you to complete the stress cycle so you can kind of think through what you want to do again from a regulated emotional place. Does that make sense?
It does.
Yeah, this book has blown my mind because I think it ties a lot of this stuff together.
Yeah, I think I want to go back to that. The stress cycle idea. I mean, I'll start here actually, since it's at the top of my brain. So the stress cycle idea, like I think of EFT as specifically you're releasing the theory being that you're releasing disturbances from the energy system that then, and those disturbances that trigger the amygdala to cause the stress response in the first place.
Right.
So I'm wondering what the common. So I can see where exercise then is it's a physical release. You're literally moving your body around, and the exertion is in fact release.
Right.
So just curious about how meditation then might be a part of that release work. It's just interesting to what the commonalities might be and all the things that we do to get us through the stress cycle. Or maybe there isn't one. Maybe it's something.
You mean
else
the science of meditation?
Yeah, the physical impact of meditation that it causes us to be able to move through the stress cycle. Like what's going on with that? I don't personally, I don't know if you know anything about that either, but
I think in all of these things, what you're doing in some way is you're stimulating a parasympathetic response. So now I'm kind of going in another direction. So like if you're anxious and you got cortisol going, you've got adrenaline going, you're in that sympathetic fight or flight response. And tapping and calming your amygdala, doing all the things that you do when you're tapped, does bring in that parasympathetic response, just like 4-7-8 breathing would do, right? So it's going to calm the whole system down. So like in polyvagal theory, okay, here we go, another place. So in polyvagal theory, there's three states of your nervous system. You've got ventral, where you're calm, everything's fine, you're okay. You've got sympathetic, which is that fight or flight, mobilized, I need to kill the saber-tooth tiger, I need to run from it. That's the start of the stress cycle, right? That's where that comes from. And then there's the dorsal, which is that freeze, like, shut down, I need to stay safe when I'm frozen. And that's kind of an immobilized place. And so all of these things, tapping and running and all of these things, are in part about finishing that fight or flight response, that stress response, that when we get upset about something, we often don't get that completion of like getting to the next town and that we've outrun the tiger and the town cheers for us and we relax and all those good chemicals flood our systems and we complete that cycle. We get in a fight with our boss at work or something happens, we don't always get to complete that cycle.
That makes a lot of sense because, like, you know, the fight, flight, and freeze response, like the running makes sense. You're literally
Right.
engaging the system as it was intended to literally
Right,
run
exactly.
away. And going back to what Stacy was saying, meditation would be an expression of freeze because you're literally, you stop moving and
It
you're
could be.
centering back to yourself.
And one of the things that's interesting about meditation is for a lot of people, when you're in that sympathetic response, meditation is near impossible, right? Like you are too worked up to be able to get there. Like I feel like there often needs to be like a transitional thing. Like you need to tap or you need to run or you need to do something so what the burnout folks would say is you need to burn something off first before you can kind of come to that, like that quiet, right? You need to come, and part of that is completing the cycle.
And I think it's been a huge missing piece from the conversation about meditation. I can't tell you how many clients, massage clients came to see me over the years saying, so meditation sounds great. I know, I quote unquote, I know I need to meditate and I can't do it. I get distracted and then they feel like failures because they can't meditate without understanding that initial piece, the segue has to happen where they burn off some energy or they get their, they do something to exert or to kind of jostle the nervous system out of that really high pitched fight or flight response to where the meditation is even an option.
So when I work with people, so there's a great book by Deb Dana called Polyvagal Theory and Therapy. And so she goes through these 3 stages of the 3 areas of the sympathetic nervous system. And what I do with clients is there's like 3 stages of mapping. So one is you map your nervous system. So this is how it feels when I'm in ventral. These are my thoughts. These are my feelings. This is the physical sensation. This is how it feels when I'm in sympathetic. This is how it feels when I'm in dorsal, right? And then the second map is what triggers me from ventral down into sympathetic. What happens that I suddenly get, in my mind, it's like chutes and ladders, right? What's the chute that drops you down into dorsal to sympathetic, or what's the chute that drops you down into dorsal? And then Deb calls them glimmers. What are the glimmers that help me come back up the ladder to the top, right? And then the third and final map is what resources can I use by myself or with others to bring myself up? So we literally create a big sheet of paper that says, when I'm in dorsal, what can I do for myself just to help move the needle a little bit so I can start to come up? When I'm feeling, in dorsal, people tend to feel really alone, really shut down, really isolated, and really hopeless. And those tend to be things like, I can wear my favorite pajamas and make a cup of tea, right? They're really like, I've got this much energy, right? Or I can ask my partner to just sit, I don't even want to talk to them, just sit next to me and put their hand on my back, right? Something really like sympathetic. How do I move up? I can clean my house. I can go for a run. I can take a yoga class, right? The more active things that are going to help me burn out that sympathetic energy and move up into ventral. So that when people land in these places, they have a piece of paper, like I did this piece of paper with Rachel, I can look at, like, I'm in dorsal, what do I need to do? Because you forget when you're in it. That's that mindfulness, right? I don't know how to get out of here. I don't remember not being in this stage. I must always be in the stage, right? Like you just lose that perspective.
It's like an amazing tool for anyone just to do on their own. With obviously, ideally with a counselor, but I'm thinking about the fact that I think you mentioned that your practice is full, and every therapist I've spoken to, their practice is full, and just having, and everyone is struggling and suffering, and this constant elevated sympathetic response we've all been undergone with the pandemic, and just more tools available for folks to just, like, I know, like Byron Katie's stuff is available online. You can go through and what are the thoughts that are bothering me, and and it's a very step-by-step process. That this would be a great tool for anyone to have at their disposal, and just getting more information about how their minds are working and their bodies are reacting, and the self-reflection piece is so huge.
Well, so Deb Dana has, what I usually give my clients is there's a PDF, it's the Beginner's Guide to Polyvagal Theory, and that kind of explains how it works, and you can just download that PDF.
Great.
You can read her whole book, which is great. In the book, she has I don't know if she has a lot of online resources, but in the book she has descriptions of each of these maps. Like I sort of read the book and then distilled it into, this is how I think I can use this book. And I've come down to these three. There's much more. So I've given you the bare bones of what she talks about. But
Sure.
those three maps seem to be the most useful thing for people to gain some awareness about what's going on for them.
Yeah.
And so now I say to people, well, could you tap when you're in sympathetic? Might that be one of the things you can do for yourself? And could you tap when you're in dorsal, right? So tapping doesn't require a ton of energy. And even if I just tap on one point or just hold my hand on my collarbone and give it pressure and talk through what's going on, that might help, right?
Yes. Yes. I'd like to do more about EFT in a minute. EMDR has been, I've been hearing about it now for, God, at least a decade, and it sounds like it's become sort of the gold standard for body access to trauma. Can you tell? It's what more people know more about than almost anything else that I've run across. Because there's sensory motor therapy, and then there's EFT and somatic experiencing, and all these other. But everyone knows EMDR. Can you tell more about that one?
I think people know EMDR because I think at this point, it's probably been around a little longer than the other two. I'm thinking of sensory motor and somatic experience, which I think are both wonderful. But I think there's been a lot of studies done with EMDR and there's been really good results. And I think in particular, a lot of work done with vets with PTSD around EMDR. So there's just been lots of the best, the randomized controlled experiments. And so insurance companies love EMDR because it's just had such a good success rate. And like with EFT, the gains made in EMDR stay gained, right? Like, so people who work through traumatic memories with EMDR, they work through it and it's done. It doesn't come back. Those memories don't tend to come back when you've done the work correctly. And so EMDR, I did my EMDR training in 2017. And when I did the EFT training, I was just so stunned by how similar, like how the premise is really the same and how similar they are. So in EMDR, which is eye movement, desensitization, and reprocessing, you are stimulating two sides of the brain using some kind of bilateral stimulation. So it can be watching someone's finger go back and forth. You can do it remotely. Someone can be crossing their arms and tapping on their shoulders or tapping on their legs. They can be watching something on a video that goes back and forth. You're basically trying to stimulate the two sides of their brain. And what Francine Shapiro, who created EMDR, discovered is when you do that bilateral stimulation, you cause something called associative information processing, which sort of allows the brain to process material in a new and different way. And just like with tapping, when you're working on something that's difficult and you get that going, you get to I can't think of the word of it, but like a reframe or re-understanding of material. So when you're doing EMDR and you're working on a memory, maybe of your parent being abusive or saying mean things, and you always thought that thing about you was true, at some point in that EMDR, you're going to come to like a new understanding of like, wait, it actually wasn't okay for my parent to say that to me. It wasn't about me, it was about them, right? And suddenly you understand the whole memory differently, right? Because that associative information processing has happened, right? So you get an adaptive understanding as opposed to the maladaptive understanding that you had. What's similar, and so it's similar to EFT in that they both sort of take either an issue or in EMDR, it's like a negative belief, and you figure out where it came from and you tap on the memories, the sort of first and worst memories that maybe caused that issue. In EMDR, we boil it down to what's the issue becomes what's the negative belief or the negative cognition. So I'm worthless, I'm not good enough, I'm not in control. It's an I am statement, right? And then we identify what's the positive cognition. Well, what would you rather believe about yourself? Well, I'd rather believe that I'm worthy. I'd rather believe that I'm safe. I'd rather believe that I have control, right? And you identify how strong, you take a stud on those two. How strong is the negative belief? Essentially, how valid is that positive belief? And then you work to do what's called a float back, which is to identify the memories that relate to that. It's the same sort of strategy you would use in EFT, right? You tap into your emotions, your physical sensation, and your thoughts, and you kind of slide back into history and figure out, well, where did this germinate? Where did this start? And if you clear enough memories, then that negative belief starts to change. So when we were doing the EFT training, I was like, I've seen this. I've seen the show before. Like I know what's happening here. I was like stunned, and I think So I have begun doing much more EFT. I almost do no EMDR at this point because I find EFT is so much gentler than EMDR because you are tapping while you're doing it. So you're regulating yourself while you're going through dysregulating material. Whereas with EMDR, it's you can do that, but I often found that it was like you had to sort of put people back together at the end of the session a little bit more. So it felt like it was a little more painful. And
So-
yeah, go ahead.
No, so that cross tapping wasn't really necessarily enough to calm them down through the process, or is that something that's not done while that access is going on?
It's done not, the cross tapping is done not really as regulating. It's actually done to stimulate. That's the bilateral stimulation, the left, right, and
it's meant to kick stuff up in the first place, not to
exactly.
soothe the nervous.
It's meant to stimulate that.
Okay,
Right.
got you.
And so it's not calming in the same way that EFT is sort of intrinsically calming. So with EMDR, someone has a memory, you pull up kind of the memory, the emotion, and the negative cognition. They often close their eyes. They're either holding buzzers. They might be holding buzzers in their hands that go left, right, or their eyes are open and they're following you. And they sort of go into their own experience. They have one foot in the room with you and one foot in that memory. And they go for maybe 30 seconds and then you stop and you check in with them. They sort of tell you for a moment where they are and they go back. And so I think it's a wonderful technique, but just for me in general, I find it much easier to move in and out of EFT. It's just more fluid than EMDR, which is like, we're going to just go and we're going to process for this whole session. And it just has a level of intensity that I have found. I don't know, I just have found that EFT is a better match for me.
It sounds, actually, I'm realizing now I've experienced sensory motor therapy and it's very similar to EMDR. And in fact, the woman I went to go see had me, in fact, so for those of you who are listening, I'm not sure we described this exactly. So you cross your hands and tap each shoulder one at a time for the cross tapping. And she had me doing that too during the processing that was happening for sensory motor therapy. I guess the thing about sensory motor therapy is you're so focused on the physical sensations, and the way they make it gentler is you try to stay out of the emotional response and stay in the physical response. So you stay out of the memory itself, kind of like how we do with EFT when we do it more gentle, stick the memories over there and just focus on, do the
tapping around the issue.
Tapping around the issue, where you set the issue aside and don't really focus on the issue, but you just tap with the intention of tapping on the issue rather than really diving into it. And sensory motor does something similar, where don't think about the actual issue, just how your body's feeling in this moment about the issue.
Yes.
So EMDR sounds like it might be the harshest one, actually.
Well, in EMDR, you can do that too. And in EMDR, you can, there are strategies for not keeping someone in that pain of it. So there are all sorts of distraction techniques that you can do with someone, so their working memory is really busy. There's visual cues that people have to start to do. It's almost like you're playing a visual game with them while they're doing it. And like the one that's the best known is escaping me at this moment. But so there are a lot of tools for keeping people just really not allowing people to fall into the pain of the experience while they're processing it. Like, for sure there are. And so I don't know that it's the least gentle technique. I just have found that I have gravitated toward EFT, sort of the easiest for me.
Yeah. So the eye movement refers to the eyes going back and forth during
side to side during the processing.
Okay. Interesting.
Yeah.
So you say you specialize in working with people with trauma. Is that so I assume the EFT is, I'm not sure what my question is. The EFT has been, you say, is gentler specifically for those folks, would you say? Like the fact that you deal with some trauma?
Yeah, I found it is gentler and just a little more, it has felt more flexible to me. So I don't want to dip into the pool of making EFT better than EMDR. I feel like that's a whole thing.
It's all about different tools for different situations, right? Having lots of tools in the toolkit.
Right. And so I find that I have gravitated towards EFT and have been able to, I certainly use some of my EMDR stuff when I'm doing EFT, as I did some training with a colleague with IFS, and I use some of my IFS stuff with EFT. And so, it's gotten a little eclectic But I feel like that's where I've landed, is kind of with EFT as the base and pulling in these other pieces. And the clients I work with, I mean, they're all different kinds of trauma. I've sort of been developing a practice that works a lot with women, a lot of women who are dealing with divorce and sort of that transition of starting their life over again. I've been doing a lot of work with women and body image issues. So trauma around that, which has been really interesting, kind of both personal trauma and like the society that we live in trauma about how we look and body. So that's also been fascinating, and using EFT for that.
Yeah, I'm realizing that. So I've been aware of these different types of body psychotherapies. That's the terms used that people have been using. Are you seeing? It seems like a kind of an obvious piece that's been missing from some traditional talk therapies, of not paying attention to having it all be a mind experience or an intellectual exercise to dive into the nuts and bolts of what happened and what happened to me and why did it happen and how do I feel about it, versus the body, the actual physical impacts of the memory, that it's like in the lizard brain and the nervous system. Are you finding that more and more therapists are in fact implementing these new therapies that are relatively, the EFTs, the IFSs, the EMDRs?
I don't know. I don't know that my reach is big enough to know that. I think I gravitate towards practitioners who are doing that kind of work. And I am finding myself less and less patient with just like straight up talk therapy, right? It's like, well, we could sit here and talk about this for 10 years, but but why don't we just do something that's going to try to fix it, right? Like I sort of have gotten, so, I don't have yet clients who come to me specifically for ET, because I'm so full. I haven't really marketed myself as like, I haven't had time to do that, but I'm integrating EFT with all of my clients. And so like, they'll just want to talk and I'm like, so let's just have you tap while you're talking. Because there's no point, why tell me this painful story and just tell me? Because really all that's going to do is like re-trigger the trauma of it and like install it in you deeper. At least if you're tapping while you're telling me, you're letting some of it go and we can move forward,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah,
So
no, it's great. It's interesting. So it's interesting. People, in fact, I assume, come to you not necessarily knowing anything about EMDR or EFT. Then
correct.
they say, hey,
Occasionally,
you're a therapist. I need to talk. And
right. People know EMDR more than they know EFT, right? So oftentimes I'll get a call for that and I'll say, I could do EMDR, but actually I've been doing more of EFT. And then I wind up doing EFT just because I'm just so in the headspace of that. I'm just doing more of it.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So when you transition, when you start to incorporate the EFT with your clients, especially your more longer standing clients, was there any resistance towards giving something else a try, or were they pretty open, or did it depend on the person?
On the whole, they've been pretty open. And I think in part that's just because I have a relationship with them. So I'll say like, so I have this thing and it's going to be a little weird and it's going to feel a little funny at first and it's a little groovy and all of those things. But why don't we just play with it? I mean, that's what I just say to people. Are you willing to be a little playful? Do you want to give it a shot? And then they give it a shot and they like it invariably. I mean, I haven't had anyone say, I don't like that. Sometimes people it's a little uncomfortable. They'll start talking and I'll say, well, why don't you start tapping? And they don't want to. It's a little hard. Or, but then once they do it, they're invariably like, oh, I feel so much calmer. I just feel so much better. That always calms me down. Just tapping on one spot while I'm talking to you.
Nice.
So I sort of trade, I guess, in answer to your question, I trade on my relationship with them to win them over to the idea. If someone doesn't know about EFT, in session number 1, I don't tend to lead with it if it's not what they've come to me for. Like I'll wait a few sessions and then I'll introduce it.
No, that makes a lot of sense. Kind of, yeah. Do that relationship building, kind of start with the expectations of the client, and then as you see, okay, I have these tools. I know they'll be very effective. Hey, like. We've had a couple sessions now. There's some trust here. Like, let's try this tool that you may not be aware of and see how it goes.
Yes. And then people just want to be helped, right? So people typically don't really care. So if I say, I've got this tool, I think it could really help you with this, and I think it will move you out of your pain more quickly, generally they're like, okay, sign me up,
That is true. That is very true. Because that is one of the nice things with EFT, like both of you were saying, that, you know, at the end of the session, the client 99% of the time is calmer than they were at the beginning of the session, because the whole time as they're tapping, their system is being relaxed as they're processing.
Right.
And that is something that is unique to EFT compared to other practices, where sometimes, like I know with myself, you know, when I had seen more conventional therapists, that there are plenty of times where I left the session out of sorts, because like you know, you're throwing the dirt in the air, but there's no method to kind of settle the dirt back down within that same session time. So
yeah, I think that's right. And so and I also think it helps people to start to, when that happens, they go, I have to, you know, at the end of every session, like, I have to remember that I could do this for myself. I'm like, right, you know. And I have one client, after 6 months of doing this, he was like, when I get angry, I need some coping skills. And I was like, okay, you have the coping skills. The trick is to remember to use them. Like, it's the same thing we were talking about before, like to have the presence of mind to think, okay, I just need to sit down and tap. And if I tap for 3 minutes, I'm probably going to feel better. Like, it doesn't even take that long, you know?
Well, that's right. So that's what a great shortcut, because let's go back to the DBT model, where if
Right.
you're looking for mindfulness, if you can't remember anything else, at least you remember to tap for a minute.
Right.
The odds are you
That's
can
right.
get to the place where you recognize the trigger and then can move on to the next steps that they've been trained in.
Exactly. So, but I know for myself, there'll be times when I'm in a mood and I think I should tap. And then I think, I don't want to tap. Right.
yes, I can concur. There have been so many times where, yeah, I've had that same experience where it's like, there's their voice finally is there. It's like, you should tap. It might make you feel better. And I'm just like, no, like, I don't wanna.
I want to stay crabby and angry and whatever it is. Damn it.
Yes, I think there's totally a place for that, where we get to wallow in our feeling of, you know, of angry and put upon and resentful, and just go ahead and let ourselves experience it. I mean, and honestly, once you have the tools, once you're confident in your own tools to get yourself out of it, it's safe to go ahead and feel those feelings without worrying about getting lost in it. Like, I get to go ahead and be really angry or really stressed or really resentful, because I know I can always tap. I always have that. I always have a way out. I won't get stuck here.
Yes, I think that's right. So that's the stress cycle, right? Getting stuck there. That's what they worry about. And it's also, you know, I can't say how many clients I would talk to about emotion surfing. And usually what happens is we come up on that wave of emotion, you get like, you know, 80% up to as the emotion goes high, and people freak out. They panic. Like, if I feel this emotion fully, it's going to kill me. Like, literally, it feels like if I allow this grief to wash over me, whatever it is, it's going to kill me. And like you just said, Stacey, if I know I can tap, then I know that even if it feels really intense, I've got a way of bringing it down. Right. And even like the stress cycle book, like they talk about, if you're crying and the crying feels really overwhelming, if you tune into the physical sensation of crying and really like notice what's happening and you can sort of get curious about it, you'll finish. Like, you'll stop crying. If you don't keep triggering the thing that got you upset, and it's not that you're not completing the emotion, but it's actually just a way of knowing you're just not going to like lay on the floor and cry for 3 days, which I think, you know, there's this irrational fear that this wave of emotion is going to knock me down and I'll never get up. Right. And tapping gives you that sense of like, well, but I know I can make it better. Right.
No, that's, oh, go ahead, Stacey.
No, go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say, that's so accurate, because there, you know, at least like with myself, it depends on the emotion. So like for me, the one that freaks me out the most is anger, where I don't want to embrace feelings of anger because I'm afraid I'm going to hit this crescendo where I like literally punch through a wall.
Right.
And it is freaky. And then you do, like you said, like as you're getting to that crescendo point, like when you're at the 70-80% point and like your blood is boiling, and it is very frightening. If it's at least with me specifically, it's frightening with it being an emotion I'm not as comfortable expressing. And so you're right, like the tapping does help calm it down and let you kind of finish that cycle.
Right.
But yeah, it's kind of like you said, like letting the wave happen, like getting to the other end of it, and then knowing that like you're not stuck there. But in the moment, in the heat of the moment, when you're climbing, it doesn't feel like it only feels like it's going to get worse.
Right. And that, I mean, I think so that's where people basically reach for a maladaptive coping skill. So that's when people grab a drink, they take a Xanax, they, whatever they do to medicate that emotion because they're so terrified that it's going to get, I can't possibly tolerate this getting any worse. It's intolerable. And if I don't feel like I have any strategies for managing that, well, like my strategy is I'm going to numb out to it because I cannot go there. And then the problem is they're stuck. Then you're stuck on this side of the wave and you don't get over the wave, right? And the thing about you, we know about emotions is that if we, it's like a toddler, right? They experience their emotions, they throw themselves on the floor, they kick the floor, they scream, and then it blows through like the wind. And then they pop up and they want to know when snack time is, right? Like they're done because they've had it. But we get afraid of that intensity of emotion and we bottle it and go do something else and stuff down and drink or whatever we do. So I think tapping is a really nice, like, okay, that's my boat and my paddle for getting over this wave because I know it's a way that I can keep myself from drowning. I can tap, and that'll get me through.
Yeah, and just I wonder how useful it is. I'm just thinking now of, I was talking to Eric before you came on about the lack of education in adulting in so many ways. And one of them is how to healthily feel, express, and process our emotional states. Because I always think of root causes. Why don't we want to feel anger? Why do we think we're going to be overwhelmed with this? Well, we never learned how to do it, never allowed ourselves to feel them strongly without, feeling unsafe to do so. And the lack of trust we have in our own body to feel the emotion without it breaking us, basically. And if you have no skills at all in handling the wave of emotion, it makes sense that you'd be nervous because you don't know, in fact, the first thing about even observing the emotions and experiencing it without getting lost in it. It's such a huge piece of our missing from our growing up in America anyway, of how exactly just letting yourself feel. And how many people think, well, and then just the cultural conditioning that strong emotions are bad, just across the board. Feeling anything, and expressing strong emotions is shameful or a sign of weakness, or the whole list of I think a different set for women versus men as far as what's allowed to be expressed and what's socially acceptable and how strongly you're allowed to express and whether you're going to get support for it when you do express is all reasons people avoid the whole thing.
I think that's exactly right. And I think it is so gendered, right? Like your boys can get angry but can't cry, girls can cry but they can't get angry, all that kind of stuff. And it's gendered in society, and it's also like what was your particular parents' model, right? Like if you never saw your parents get angry or have a fight, like maybe they did it behind closed doors or whatever, you get married, you and your spouse have a fight and you get hysterical because you think you're getting divorced because you're not allowed to show anger like that. Like people carry these things all around. And I experience a lot of clients who have had experience feeling that emotion, like physical sensation in their body, and like have completely cut off or completely cut off from it. So they're living like chin up, which makes EFT interesting because when you ask them, what does that feel like in your body? And they go, I have no idea. I can't tell you anything I feel in my body, right? I have no, I don't feel that anywhere, because I think it's been easier to just cut off from that experience.
Absolutely. Another thing I love about EFT, at least I've experienced this with at least one client where that client was definitely cut off the way you're saying. But they specifically said, even though they weren't comfortable accessing the body and like their minds were resistant, the tapping gently kind of forced the issue. Basically the reconnection happened through the EFT without them needing to control it, and gently enough that they weren't freaked out by it and realized, oh, I suddenly have access to more information in my body. And I never had it. That's just from the physical act of tapping. They came out from their head a little bit down into their body.
Absolutely. Which is a good thing.
Yeah. Anything we can do.
I think that's right.
So out of curiosity, your focus towards trauma, was that intentional or was that just circumstantial and then you end up enjoying that particular niche, or how did that happen?
I don't really know. And the thing about trauma is, like, in my mind, it's big T trauma and little T trauma, so I just feel like everybody has some kind of trauma. I mean, so when I was in college, my first experience counseling was my senior year in college. I volunteered at a battered women's shelter, and I was a volunteer counselor. I was maybe 20 years old, and they didn't train us. It was out of this very this very feminist collective that I was a woman and I had ears. Therefore,
You were
I was
qualified.
suitable. Right. So there I was, literally 20 years old, counseling women in their mid 40s who were at the shelter because they had come out of an abusive relationship. I don't know what they thought when they were. I can't even imagine now what that must have been like. So they threw you in, and then I finally got some training. And so I did that work for a little while and got burnt out on it, and left the field of counseling for a long time, left for 20 years, had my babies, went into nonprofit administration, wrote a bunch of plays, raised a bunch of money. And so I sort of had that background in dealing with trauma. And then feeling like everything is trauma, right? Like everybody has that little thing your dad said to you when you were a kid that you integrated and you decided it meant that you were some kind of way. Well, that's trauma, right? It's a little T trauma, but it's trauma.
Yes.
And so I think of it pretty broadly, but it seems to be the reason why we all do the things we do, and the thing that gets in our way are all those old messages, right? So why spend any time anywhere else?
No, it's very, very true. And conveying that the spectrum that is trauma, that it's not just the conventional former soldier or sexual abuse and things like that. Like those are like the big T trauma, but it's but like you said, it's all the other things that we're playing these old scripts from our past because it's poking at an old wound that hasn't healed properly.
Right. And, as a parent, I'm confident I have inflicted some of those little T traumas. Hopefully they're only little T's on my children, because you can't help because we're all imperfect. Right. And so everybody's carrying this stuff around and trying to sort it through, and working it out is it's the golden ticket, right? Like, oh, that's not actually mine. That's someone else's that they dumped on me, and I don't have to carry that anymore. Right. I don't have to think like that anymore.
No, for sure. And that's something too, like from a parental standpoint, that it's so much pressure, where it's like, though for parents who are aware of the impact that they truly have on their children's psyche, that's an immense amount of pressure. But just like what you said, it's gonna happen. You're going to leave marks on your children because you are so influential. And and every parent is still human, and no parent has a playbook as to what to do.
Right.
And so, something like the ultimate irony being like a parent could do everything in their power to be the perfect parent. And then all it takes is the parent having one bad day that's unrelated to the kid, and the kid just is around, and all of a sudden something got left. Like, you're driving in the car, you get cut off, you curse at the other driver, and now you gave a driving phobia to your kid in the back seat. And it was just like, it just happened. Like, and it's kind of how it goes. Like, you want to prevent the big T traumas. No one wants that. But that, it's
unavoidable.
It's unavoidable. And the more influence you have, it's on both sides, the positive influence and then the negative influences.
And what's so remarkable about it is, I think it's sort of like, as a therapist, like, I never know the things that are going to impact my clients. And I'll think I said some really great, profound thing, and then they'll come back a month later and be like, that thing you said, and I don't even remember saying it. Like, that was the thing that changed their life. Right. The same is with my children. So my kids are basically about to be 18 and 22, and my 22-year-old will tell me something that I said to her when she was 9, that became this thing for her. And it was a throwaway line. It was like a nothing line for me. Like, I didn't, and I never would have caught it as being a thing. And it's like, oh, that you've been really, and so, and it meant nothing to me. And I didn't even, there was nothing behind it for me, but she, we all do that, right? We take it in, we internalize it. Kids are programmed to have it mean something about them. And then they're off and running. And so, all those tiny little paper cuts, right? You want to heal.
For sure. And it's the other side of that coin too. It's not the parent-child moments, like those public service announcement-y kind of things, like the cliche, you sit down, you have the talk, and then all of a sudden the wisdom has been passed and it's sunken, and it's like, it doesn't work like that either.
No, it doesn't.
Sometimes sometimes you can pick up on, a child picks up on the wisdom from their parents just from witnessing it, and the parent might not have any clue what's going on.
Yes.
They might just be living their life, and then all of a sudden they've passed something on to their kid, and then, like you said, the same thing could happen, years later. But like, I remember when I was 7, you were, you did that nice thing, you helped out that homeless person by giving him an extra coffee or whatever.
Right.
And like, ever since then, I've been wanting to help homeless people. And the parents like, I did that once, and I'm not even that nice of a person. Like,
right. Well, it's like that old adage, like your kids do what you do, not what you say. Like what you say is really very secondary to what you do, right? So they're going to model what they see you doing, and what you say is a little bit like lip service, right?
No, yeah, it's very true. And so I'm not a parent, so I don't have as many of these lessons in that way. But I do remember on the last family trip that I was on before all this nonsense, with my niece and my nephew picked up on some of my verbiage that I didn't realize was unique even to me.
Mm-hmm.
And so, I think it was like saying absolutely as like, instead of saying yes, like, for sure. I think that was what I was saying. And then ever since, he started, like, my sister would say to me, oh, he keeps saying that now, you got that from you. And I'm just like, oh crap. I have to be really careful what I do or what I say. Because like they're sponges, kids. And so it's just funny.
My partner, we would joke, like, if you started got into an argument, he would go, well, if you need to be right, you can be right. And all of a sudden you realize that you were like fighting to be right in an argument where maybe it was like a really good, like, oh yeah, I'm just, trying to make a point. So it became like a joke in our family, and my son picked it up. And at that time he was I think he was in 3rd grade maybe. And he went into school and had a substitute teacher, and the substitute teacher told him something. And he said, well, but I don't think, and she came back at it, and he looked at her, said, well, if you need to be right, you're right, to his teacher, which immediately got him sent to the principal's office. And he came home and he was like, I mean, you guys say it. And I was like, okay, I'm going to need to really be careful.
The ultimate irony, though, is that he probably was right, even as the
he said to me, he was like, it was like in a thing where it was his opinion versus her opinion, and she wasn't sort of empirically absolutely right. And so he sort of used it in the right way, but it wasn't okay.
But yeah,
no adult, system.
Yeah, no adult wants
right
3rd graders, 8 years old, and wants an 8-year-old to kind of zing them like that.
Exactly. Yeah.
But no, that's so true, because it's something that I still need to learn sometimes myself. But this, for the men that are listening to this, like, and please, for the 2 of you being women, correct me if I'm wrong. Sometimes if a woman in your life is venting about something that's going on, men go to this default of trying to fix it, of offering the suggestions and things like that, when sometimes the resolution is just to listen. And so I've been hearing this more and more now, where it's like, where husbands are starting to ask their wives, like, are you looking for advice? Or are you wanting me just to listen?
Yeah, it's funny. This has been like bopping around social media, I think, because suddenly everybody has been talking about it, which is like this clarification of, do you need me to problem solve? Like, are we problem solving here, or am I providing comfort? And then someone else talked about it with their teenager, and more specifically, do you want problem solving, or kid problem solving, intervention, or comfort? Like, do you need me to get involved in some way? Right. And because I think, like, for example, like I learned years ago, like with a teenager or even a preteen, they don't often want problem solving, right? Like they actually know better than you how to problem solve like an issue with their friends. They just want you to sort of sit there with them and let them rant and support them. And then they're good. But when you start telling them what to do, then they're pissed off. I know what to do. I don't need you. But for I talk to couples all the time about that, about asking for clarification, right? Or saying, I need to tell you something. I just need you to listen. I just need comfort. I'm not looking for a solution. I know what to do, you know?
No, and it's those points of clarification can be so important, because then the person who's needing the support, the person who's bringing up the issue to begin with, gets what they need, and then the other individual isn't spinning their wheels.
Right.
Which is, and so then you don't, so then you don't have you don't have the end situation, like the example you gave with the kid, where the kid's pissed off because now it feels like the parent's trying to intrude, and the parent's annoyed because it's like, well, you came to me with a problem.
Right.
So it's just both can walk away being like, oh, I helped, or I got what I needed, which is so important.
Mm-hmm.
It's a lovely moment of mindfulness too, right? I mean, how often do we want to fix it because we're uncomfortable with the person's distress? So that's us, right? Having a moment of distress, and we want to make it go away for our own sake as much as for the other person's sake. So it's a real act of mindfulness and compassion and love to step back and say, what do you actually need to happen in this moment? How do I support you, rather than simply reacting to your distress in a way to make me, to help me cope with your distress.
I think that's
sense.
I think that's exactly right. And I think that shows up especially with grief. So if I were to have another specialty that I would want, it would be grief. Because I love doing grief work. And that is so much what you just said, Stacey, is this thing is like, how do you be with someone in their pain without trying to fix it, and managing your own discomfort in their pain, right? Without trying to silver lining it. And like, that's work, right? As a therapist or even as a friend, to just allow someone to experience what they're experiencing and be present for it, right? And hold space for it, without trying to fix, right? There's no fixing grief. It's unfixable,
Mm-hmm.
And so I think you're right. I think that's where some of that fixing comes from. It's like, well, I don't want you to feel this way anymore because it's uncomfortable for me.
Mm-hmm. Mm.
But just like what you were saying before about riding the waves, grief is one of those waves where you got to ride it. You got to
Yep.
let it happen, because
Yep.
if you try to stop it anywhere, it will just keep pushing against you until you get through it. Because like you said, grief is like you said, it's unfixable. It can be resolved. It will resolve eventually if you let it happen. But it's unfixable.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's the hardest thing to say to someone who's experienced a loss, that like this will change. You won't carry it so heavy. You won't carry it so all the time. Like, it won't always feel like this, but you're never not going to have this, right? It's always going to be with you in some way, right? It has altered you, right? And sometimes people don't like to always hear that, but also sometimes people are super relieved because other people have been saying to them, you'll get over it, right? And that doesn't really feel so great either, right? What do you mean I'll get over it? How am I going to get over it, right? That doesn't seem plausible.
Yeah.
No, that makes a lot of sense, phrasing it the way you said, because it honors the fact that someone has gone. It honors the gap in the person's life, while still giving them reassurance of like, you will adapt to the fact that this individual isn't there anymore.
Well, and you'll change your relationship with them, right? So you'll develop a new relationship with them being gone, right? Your relationship with them will shift into a different kind of relationship. This has sort of been the change in grief theory over the years, of like, you'd sort of go through the 5 stages and then this boom, bow, you're done, right? And you're like, it's resolved and fixed. And more and more, the grief work is really about coming to this understanding of this, of making me, so I think Stacey and I talked about this a little bit, of David Kessler, who worked with Elizabeth Kubler-Ross on grief and wrote books with her. He sort of has taken her work forward. He lost his adult son recently while he was writing this book on the 6th stage of grief called Finding Meaning. So he's all about like how you then find meaning in the loss of this person and integrate it into your life and kind of continue that relationship forward in a new way that feels meaningful to you, right? And so that's kind of the work of the grieving person, is to sort of get there, all of which I don't know that I would have understood until I'd had, like, my father died 4.5 years ago, and I don't know that I would have been able to even understand that until that particular loss. Grief is funny that way.
Absolutely. And it makes me think about the fact that, the piece that's been missing all along is the idea, or the belief system that's been in place, is that strong emotions are dangerous and should be suppressed or moved through as quickly as possible,
Mhm.
or hurry up and get over it, when in fact having strong emotional states is it's one of the things we do as human beings. Like
Right.
it's our pathway to understanding ourselves, having greater wisdom, having a greater connection to ourselves and to our loved ones. Like experiencing those strong emotions isn't just a thing to hurry up and finish. It's a thing to
Right.
experience and really
Right.
live inside of. And that includes processing grief. And yes, it's painful and sad and often wrenching and the worst thing ever. And dive in and experience it, because
Right.
it's part of what it's part of what it is to be a living human being, and
Right.
why we show up in the first place, right? Gaining the
Right. It's the
wisdom.
human condition. Yeah.
It's but and not just suffering for the sake of suffering, but the suffering as just the gain. There are as many gains from the suffering as there is pain when it comes to it. And we talked about that too, because I've lost my father
Yeah.
just
Yeah.
last year, and and we've been talking about death on the podcast as well, and just the lessons learned and integrated on a physical level, emotional level, intellectual
Mhm.
level, when you go have this particular kind of experience. And it just changes your connections to yourself and your understanding of everything around you going through a grief process. So
Yeah.
it's not hurry up and get through it. It's not check off the boxes of stages. It's this is what you're doing now. This is a thing you're doing.
Yes.
And do it and dive in and embrace it, because yes, you'll have a process that will leave you at the end of it changed, and in a way that makes your life richer in
Yeah.
a surprising way.
Yeah. And I think, and if you don't do it, it will do you, right? Like grief will
Yes.
happen to you if you don't allow it. And I think people in the very beginning want to know, am I done? Is it over? How long is this going to
Mm,
take? Right? When am I going to feel better? Because because it is so excruciating, right?
Sure.
But you can't have all the good stuff without all the bad stuff, right? So you can't just love and not have. So it is that whole mix
It
of it.
is. Yeah.
Yeah.
And being
And
at
to,
peace with the mix is
yeah,
another part of it too. Is it something isn't all good or all bad. Sometimes it's,
right.
like the Inside Out movie, with the little balls that are a swirl of different emotional states, and
Right.
that's just what it is. It's a swirl.
Well, and like what you said earlier, Stacey, not to be afraid just because an emotion is big. I don't have to be afraid of it, right? To
Mm,
understand, I think people start to understand, like, oh, I can actually tolerate big feelings. I'm big enough. I am bigger. I mean, one of the things in DBT, to go full circle here, is that one of the things we start to talk about with emotions is that you can have an emotion, but you are an emotion. So it's changing I'm angry to I'm having feelings of anger come up, right? I'm angry is overwhelming because then all I am is anger. There's nothing else. But if I'm
mm.
bigger than my anger, if I'm a person and I'm having an emotional experience of anger, then there's room for some other things, right? Then there's a little more space and a little more wisdom in there. So I can feel anger without being all I am is anger, and all of the emotions that show up. Having feelings of shame. I am not shame, right? My whole body isn't shame. Just that gives you a little more like, oh, there's my wise mind seeing that happening.
No, that's super smart. Creating that cognitive distance between the emotion being felt and expressed versus being identifying with the emotion.
Yeah.
That's super
Yeah.
smart.
Yeah.
it's another opportunity to connect to the capital S self you're talking about. I mean,
Exactly.
every time we do that, right, we're gaining a skill, invaluable skill that we just carry around with us all the time. Every time we're
Right.
able to access the wise self.
Right. I mean, anytime you notice you are having a thought or a feeling, the I noticing that part of you then becomes bigger than the thought or the feeling, right? So then you see there's that observing part that can see and have some choice about what you do with that thought or that feeling, right? So it's always that like stepping back and not being sort of consumed, right?
Mm-hmm.
That gives you a little more, it allows you to feel like you have a little more agency over it, right? A little more control.
Yes.
No, for sure.
Yeah.
And then, the importance as well of allowing oneself to feel the emotions at the intensity that they want to go naturally, because, you know, no one want like we've all said, no one wants to feel the darker emotions that we all have within ourselves to their intensity. But the consequence that sometimes people don't realize they're doing when they slice off the depths of sadness or shame or anger, they're slicing off the depths of happiness and joy and being content. They're numbing themselves across the board. You can't shift the scales without shifting the scale, without affecting everything emotionally.
Yes. Yeah. People don't like that, but it seems to be so, right? And it doesn't, if you slice off the top and don't feel the rest of it, it doesn't go anywhere, right? You're still sitting there, you still got it inside you, right? So at some point, it's gonna find its way out. I just have never seen anyone successfully avoid that, right? Without cost.
I don't know if that's possible without
Right.
without sacrificing a big part of what it means to be human, to truly abandon your emotions, which I don't even know if that is possible, or if that's just severe suppression.
The purpose of the feelings is to be felt.
Yeah.
They're gonna make their purpose known.
Which is why I'm so grateful. I mean, I'm thinking of generations in the past that, the cost is people cut off a huge part of themselves and their emotional experiences. I'm just so grateful that now we have all these techniques and tools now to really dive into our emotional states without fear, and learning to embrace every aspect of our emotional states with the EMDR and EFT and IFS and sensory motor therapy. Is just so many options now for folks and that's a huge reason we're having this podcast is to just let people know that there are choices now unlike any we've had before, I think, at any other point in modern history, for really reintegrating our emotional states with our thinking states, with our bodies, and living life in the way we're meant to be living it, experiencing everything as it's meant to be experienced.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right.
Awesome. So, any last words of wisdom, Rachel, that you'd like to leave us today? That was a very fascinating conversation.
Yikes, a word of wisdom? I don't know. I mean, I think it's what we were just talking about would be the only word of wisdom, which is that, that the feelings won't kill you, and suppressing the feelings will just ruin the good, right? It causes the suffering, right? So the idea is that it's okay to feel pain, but when we suppress that pain, when we suffer, and suffering is much worse than pain, right? So if you let yourself go through the pain, you come out the other side. It's that stress cycle. You come out the other side of the tunnel. If you get stuck in suppressing the feeling, then you're suffering and you're walking around the tunnel with no light at the end. So
very true.
There's my dark thought.
But with the positive, just keep moving, move through the tunnel.
All emotions will pass. Emotion is like the weather, right? It will pass.
It'll pass. No, it's very true.
Yes, the self is eternal and the emotions will pass.
Right. This too shall pass.
Nice.
And would you want to let people know how they can reach out to you, or would you prefer not? Your call.
Yeah, people can find me online. So I'm on Psychology Today. I have a kuhncounseling.com tiny little website that gives people ways to contact me. A new website is in the works, but yeah, people can always reach out. I keep a waiting list and reach out to people as slots become available.
Awesome. Right. And we'll put the links in the show notes and all of that.
Awesome.
So thank you so much, Rachel, for joining us. It was a pleasure. We both learned a ton. And
thanks, you guys.
You're quite welcome. And for our listeners, we hope to touch base with you again next week.